Elon Musk was taking a casual drive through downtown San Francisco when something caught his eye. As his black Tesla glided through the city streets, a park bench under the gray sky drew his attention. A man sat hunched under a tattered blue tarp, trying to shield himself from the drizzle. On any given day, Elon might have simply passed by, ignoring the homeless figures who were sadly becoming too familiar in the city. But today was different. This man, despite the weathered appearance, looked hauntingly familiar. "Roy, slow down," Elon said to his driver, the request sharp and immediate. The car eased to a stop, and Elon leaned closer to the window, squinting through the misty rain. The figure on the bench had an unmistakable presence, a scruffy beard streaked with gray, a weathered jacket, and a look that Elon couldn't ignore. But it wasn't just the disheveled appearance that tugged at Elon's memory. He felt an odd rush of recognition. Those eyes, they were too familiar. "Elon, is everything all right?" Roy, his driver, asked, sensing his boss's growing unease. Elon didn't respond immediately. He just stared at the man, heart racing. After a beat, he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Darren." The man on the bench didn't respond at first, his face hidden under the tarp, but then he slowly lifted his eyes, squinting through the rain, his expression confused. There was a moment of hesitation before recognition flickered in his gaze, quickly replaced by something that looked like regret. "Elon?" the man rasped, his voice rough from years of neglect. Elon nodded slowly, stepping out of the car with an umbrella in hand. The cold San Francisco air hit him as he crossed the street. As he walked towards the park bench, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: shock, disbelief, and guilt. "Darren," Elon repeated, now standing in front of him, umbrella held out. "It's been years." The man, Darren, looked up at him. His clothes were ragged, and his eyes, which had once been full of fire and intelligence, now seemed dulled by years of hardship. Yet, the recognition in his eyes still remained. The young tech genius he once knew had turned into a broken shell, and the reality of it hit Elon harder than he expected. Elon hesitated, unsure of how to offer help without insulting Darren's pride. "What happened? How did you end up here?" Darren chuckled bitterly, looking down at the worn-out backpack by his side. "What does it look like?" "I'm living, just surviving." Elon felt a pang of guilt at how poorly the question had come out. "I didn't mean it like that," he said quickly. I thought you were running your own company. You were doing great things." "That was a lifetime ago," Darren muttered, his voice still rough. "That life's gone." He glanced at Elon, his eyes briefly flashing with a mixture of sadness and anger. "Look at you, all high and mighty with your rocket ships and billions. You don't need to worry about me." Elon reached out, his hand offering a moment of connection, but Darren flinched, moving away. "I'm not offering charity, Darren," Elon said, his tone firm but kind. "I'm offering help, a chance to talk. We can catch up. I'm not going to just walk away like nothing happened." Darren hesitated, clearly torn. The bitterness in his eyes softened, but his pride was still a wall he couldn't break down. He looked up at Elon for a long moment, then shook his head. "Fine. One coffee. But that's it." They walked to a diner nearby, a small, retro place that Elon knew was quiet and discreet. Inside, the contrast between the two men was striking. Elon, impeccably dressed in his designer clothes, looked out of place next to Darren, who appeared to be wearing everything he owned: layers of old clothes, torn boots, and a face that spoke of too many nights spent on the streets. They sat in silence for a moment, each of them processing the strange reunion. Then Elon spoke. "So, I heard you're working on something new," he said, trying to ease the tension. "Neuralink, right? What happened to that?" Darren's face darkened immediately. "It's gone," he said flatly. "After the dot-com crash, it all went under. Bad decisions, bad investments, a partner who screwed me over. The usual stuff. You know how it goes." Elon's expression softened, sensing the layers of pain in Darren's voice. "I didn't realize it had gotten that bad." "Of course you didn't," Darren replied bitterly. "You were too busy launching rockets and building electric cars." He paused, his eyes flickering with some semblance of pride. "But I didn't give up on the dream. I kept going until I couldn't anymore." They both sat in silence, as the waitress brought their drinks, each of them reflecting on the past. Elon could see the man who had once been the brilliant, passionate engineer, the first person to ever believe in his vision, fading before his eyes. It was hard to reconcile this man with the genius he once knew. As they talked, it became clear that Darren's life had spiraled out of control after the crash of his company. The failure had shattered him in ways Elon hadn't expected. He was ashamed to admit that he had lost track of Darren over the years. He had assumed his old friend had moved on, found success elsewhere. But here he was, homeless, forgotten by the world he had once helped shape. Elon paused, then looked at Darren seriously. "I know it's a lot, but I want to offer you a chance. I think you still have what it takes." Darren stared at him for a long moment, processing the words. "You want to help me?" he said slowly, almost sarcastically. "How? Give me a job? A place to stay?" Elon shook his head. "No, I want to give you a challenge. I think you're the only person who can solve it." "Challenge?" Darren scoffed. "What kind of challenge?" Elon leaned in, lowering his voice. "Tesla's working on a new self-driving technology, and we're hitting a roadblock. We need someone who can think outside the box, someone who knows neural networks inside and out. What I'm asking is simple. Can you solve a problem that no one else has been able to crack?" Darren blinked, processing the words. A challenge. A way to prove he hadn't lost everything. Elon waited for a response, his gaze steady. Darren sat back in his seat, staring at his coffee cup for a moment before meeting Elon's eyes. "You think I can still do it?" "I know you can." The following day, as Elon Musk settled into his sleek office, the silence around him was oppressive. His mind was still reeling from the encounter with Darren the day before. The brilliant programmer he once knew, now reduced to a shadow of his former self, haunted him. Elon sat at his desk, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the past, to the days when he and Darren were just two ambitious young men, burning with ideas and determination. It was 1995, and Elon was 24 years old. His venture, Zip2, was a tiny company, an idea still in its infancy, working from a cramped office in Palo Alto. The walls were littered with pizza boxes, empty soda cans, and hand-drawn sketches of what would become a revolutionary product. It wasn't much, but Elon had big dreams, the kind of dreams that made you believe the world could be reshaped with a few lines of code and the right people around you. It was in that office that Darren Fulton first walked in. At 22, Darren was fresh out of Stanford, a newly minted computer science graduate with fire in his eyes and a mind that moved faster than anyone Elon had ever met. He had wire-rimmed glasses and carried a weathered notebook filled with ideas. When Elon and his brother Kimball explained their vision for an online city guide, a platform that would connect local businesses with customers, Darren didn't just listen. He challenged them. He pushed them. He asked questions no one else had thought to ask. "Elon, you're working with bitmap images for your maps?" Darren had asked, flipping through their wireframe designs. "That's going to kill the system. You need to consider vector-based images if you want it to scale. And have you thought about the speed limitations? The internet back then was slower than a dial-up connection. You'll need a more efficient system." Elon and Kimball exchanged looks. They didn't even know what vector-based images were, let alone how to build them into their system. But Darren's confidence, the way he could see the future through the lens of his knowledge, was exactly what they needed. "Can you start tomorrow?" Elon asked, his voice full of hope. Darren grinned. "I can start today." That afternoon, they all dove into the work. The office was small and cramped, the space filled with the hum of computers and the smell of cold pizza. But they didn't care. Elon and Darren stayed up late, working side by side. Elon focused on the user interface, sketching design ideas, and figuring out how to make the platform usable, while Darren wrote code at lightning speed, reworking the database, and optimizing the system for faster performance. Around midnight, Darren pointed to the screen, his fingers dancing over the keyboard. "This isn't going to work with the database structure you've set up. We need to redesign it so that it can handle more data. Otherwise, it will crash under the load." Elon groaned. "You're telling me we have to start over?" Darren nodded. "Not completely, but it's not going to work with the current structure." Over the next 3 days, they barely left the office. They slept on the floor, their eyes bloodshot from the constant coding and caffeine. They worked through their frustration, joking and bickering like old friends. Elon admired Darren's relentless focus, while Darren respected Elon's unyielding vision. By the time they were done, they had rebuilt the entire database, restructured it to handle far more data, and optimized the entire system. Elon stared at the test data, amazed at how quickly it was being processed. They had gone from a broken database to a fully functioning system in less than a week. "This is brilliant," Elon said, his voice filled with admiration. "Where did you learn to do this?" Darren shrugged, a modest smile tugging at his lips. "My dad brought home an Apple II when I was 10. It was love at first sight. I've been coding ever since." The success of that week marked the beginning of their friendship. It wasn't just about the work. It was the shared vision, the ambition to change the world. The two men pushed each other, late into the night, until the sound of the birds outside would remind them that the sun was rising again. They weren't just colleagues. They were partners, comrades in the trenches of building a startup. And the startup began to grow. Zip2 started gaining traction. They secured early investments and began to scale. Darren continued to work as the lead programmer, while Elon focused more on the business side, meeting with investors and potential clients. Their late-night brainstorming sessions became less frequent as the company grew and their responsibilities increased. But the bond they shared was undeniable. By 1997, Zip2 was a success, and the company had grown from a tiny office in Palo Alto to a business worth millions. It was then that they received an offer from Compaq, which wanted to purchase Zip2 for $307 million. Elon's mind raced as he considered the future. This was the moment he had dreamed of. They had made it. But as they stood on the roof of their office, watching the lights of Palo Alto flicker below them, they knew that this was just the beginning. For both of them, the acquisition wasn't the end. It was a stepping stone. "What's next for you?" Elon asked, his voice full of excitement. "I'm thinking about online payments. There's no real solution out there yet." Darren looked at Elon, a glint in his eyes. "I'm going to focus on neural networks. It's where the future is. Artificial intelligence, brain-machine interfaces. That's what I want to build." Elon nodded, impressed. "Sounds ambitious, but if anyone can make it work, it's you." They raised their beers, toasting to the future. They were partners, dreamers, and world changers. But as time went on, the paths of the two men began to diverge. Elon poured himself into creating X.com, which later became PayPal, while Darren moved forward with his passion for neural networks, founding Neuralink. Elon's company became a massive success, and Darren's venture faltered. The dot-com crash in 2000 decimated many of the companies in Silicon Valley, and Neuralink was one of the casualties. Darren's pride, ambition, and determination to make something revolutionary ultimately became his downfall. He lost his company, his fortune, and the dream that had once burned so brightly. Darren retreated into isolation, eventually ending up on the streets of San Francisco. And that was where Elon found him, years later, under a tarp in a park, staring at the remnants of a once great mind. The days following the sale of Zip2 marked the beginning of a new era for Elon Musk, one filled with promise, excitement, and boundless opportunity. With the $22 million he earned from Zip2, Elon was able to fund X.com, a company that would later evolve into PayPal. As the digital payment space exploded, Elon was on the cutting edge, building the future of finance and technology. Meanwhile, Darren Fulton, the brilliant programmer who had been at the heart of Zip2's early success, found himself spiraling into a different kind of future, one filled with personal turmoil, miscalculations, and eventually, ruin. It was a slow fall at first. After the dot-com crash, Darren's vision for Neuralink, his company focused on neural interfaces and artificial intelligence, seemed to be ahead of its time. The venture capitalists who had been so eager to invest in Silicon Valley startups in the mid-90s suddenly vanished as the bubble burst. With little funding and an increasing sense of desperation, Darren refused to pivot. He believed that the technology had the potential to change the world. It wasn't just a trend, it was the future. But, as with so many other companies during that time, Neuralink was swallowed by the harsh realities of the tech market. Investors pulled out, partners left, and the momentum Darren had once harnessed faltered. His personal life mirrored the collapse of his professional world. A divorce from his wife, Lisa, followed by the loss of his daughter Emma, to the pressures of their strained relationship, drove Darren deeper into isolation. He retreated into his work, which became an increasingly futile attempt to regain the sense of purpose he had once known. His once thriving career now seemed like a distant memory, and Darren's failures consumed him. He lost everything: his home, his family, his company. He moved into a small apartment in Oakland, hoping that it was just a setback. But it wasn't. The failure of Neuralink wasn't just a business blow. It was an emotional and psychological collapse that Darren couldn't recover from. And as his savings dwindled, the apartment in Oakland became too expensive. Darren found himself living in a series of rental spaces and, eventually, homeless. The future that had once been full of promise now felt like an endless void. By 2003, Darren was completely disconnected from the world he had helped shape. His former friends, the ones he had once considered partners, were now unreachable, absorbed by their own successes. Elon, whose career had skyrocketed with PayPal's success, was building new ventures like SpaceX and Tesla, exploring space and creating electric cars. Darren, on the other hand, was alone, forgotten by the world he had helped revolutionize. It wasn't until the summer of 2003, as he wandered the streets of San Francisco, that Darren realized how far he had fallen. He had no phone, no connections. His laptop had been stolen months earlier, and his once prized notebook, filled with sketches of algorithms, diagrams, and the blueprint for the next great breakthrough, was now hidden away in a second-hand backpack, soaked from the rain. Every day was a struggle. Darren spent his time in public libraries, trying to keep his mind sharp, coding for hours on end, hoping that somehow someone would recognize the potential still buried deep inside him. He couldn't stop thinking about the neural networks he had once dreamed of, about the future that never came to be. The cruel irony was that the world had moved on without him, and all the brilliant ideas he had once fostered now seemed pointless, left to collect dust in a stolen laptop and the back pages of notebook. The streets of San Francisco were brutal, but Darren tried to maintain his dignity. He would shower in public restrooms and eat whatever he could scrounge together. He made it through the days, but each night was worse than the last. Every time he laid down on a park bench or in a homeless shelter, the emptiness inside him felt deeper. He no longer recognized the person he had been. Darren never forgot his daughter, Emma. The pain of knowing he was missing out on her life cut him to the core. She was growing up, and he wasn't there. He had missed her childhood, and now, as she approached adulthood, it was too late to make up for lost time. He had tried to reach out to her in the early days of his downfall, but his messages, his attempts to explain, were always met with silence. Eventually, the distance became too much to bear, and he gave up. The world had moved on, and so had she. Darren would sometimes walk past the sleek buildings of Silicon Valley, peering through the glass at the companies he had once helped build, watching as they flourished. It was the city of dreams for so many, but for him, it was a painful reminder of everything he had lost. In the winter of 2007, as the economy faltered and Silicon Valley entered a new wave of tech growth, Darren's situation became desperate. He had been living on the streets for nearly 3 years, and the constant struggle to survive left him exhausted. He kept working on his old ideas, sketching out algorithms in notebooks that were growing increasingly worn and torn. But it seemed like no one cared. No one was interested in his work anymore. He was just another forgotten man, lost in the shuffle of an industry that had no room for failures. On one particularly rainy afternoon, while Darren was hunched over in a small park near downtown San Francisco, trying to stay dry beneath his tattered tarp, he saw something that changed everything. A sleek black Tesla rolled past the park, slowing down as it approached the bench where he sat. Darren, too tired to react, simply looked up, barely registering the car. But then, as the vehicle came to a stop and the door opened, he saw the figure stepping out. It was Elon Musk. For a moment, Darren thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. He blinked, trying to clear the haze of fatigue from his mind. But there was no mistaking it. Elon Musk stood before him, umbrella in hand, staring down at him as if he had seen a ghost. "Elon," Darren whispered, his voice hoarse from years of disuse. Elon's face was filled with a mixture of shock and recognition. He seemed to pause for a moment, taking in the sight of Darren, the once brilliant programmer who had helped build the foundation of so many of the technologies he now owned. The world felt like it had shifted. Here he was, standing face to face with the person he had once called a partner, the man who had helped change the future of technology, and now he was living on the streets. "I never thought I'd find you here," Elon said quietly, almost to himself. His voice was filled with a depth of sadness that surprised even Darren. Elon stood there in the rain, looking down at Darren, who sat hunched on the park bench under his blue tarp. The scene before him felt surreal, a stark contrast to the man Elon had once known, his first employee, the brilliant programmer who had helped build the foundations of what would become one of the most successful tech empires in the world. Darren had always been full of fire, ambition, and ideas. To see him now, a mere shell of that person, weighed heavily on Elon's heart. After a few moments, Elon broke the silence, his voice softer than before. "Darren, I don't know what happened, but this isn't you." Darren laughed bitterly, his eyes hardening. "No, was me then, Elon. The guy who had everything, who made all the right moves, and still ended up on the streets? Is that what you're trying to tell me?" His voice cracked, the years of pain and frustration bubbling to the surface. Elon didn't know how to respond to that. The words felt empty, inadequate. Nothing could undo the hardship Darren had gone through. But he couldn't stand there and let the past define them both. "I'm not here to judge you," Elon said quietly, his tone firm, yet gentle. "I'm here to offer you something. A chance." Darren looked up at him, confusion crossing his face. "A chance? What's that supposed to mean? You think I can just go back to being the guy I was? The one who helped you start everything?" Elon shook his head, his gaze steady. "I'm not asking you to go back. I'm asking you to move forward. I want to offer you a challenge." "A challenge?" Darren repeated, his voice filled with skepticism. "Is this some kind of charity project, Elon? Is that what this is? You give me a few bucks, put me up in a hotel, and pretend like everything's fine?" "No, Darren," Elon said, his voice sharpening. "This isn't charity. This is a chance to prove to yourself that you're still the man you used to be, the man I believed in. I need your help, Darren. Tesla, we've hit a wall. I'm trying to make self-driving cars a reality, and we've run into a problem that no one else has been able to solve. You're the only person I know who could even begin to figure this out." Darren's eyes narrowed. "You want me to solve your little self-driving problem?" "Yes," Elon said, his voice unyielding. "I'm offering you a real opportunity. If you can solve it, we'll talk about bringing you back into the fold. If you can't, well, at least you'll know you gave a shot." The challenge was a bold one, but it was the only way Elon could think of to get through to Darren, to spark the fire that he knew was still inside him. He watched as Darren processed the offer, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of them. For a long moment, Darren didn't speak. He just stared at the ground, as though wrestling with a decision that seemed too monumental to make. And then, finally, he looked up at Elon. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" Elon nodded. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. I know you have the ability, Darren. You always have. It's time to see if you still do." Darren shook his head slowly, as though weighing the gravity of what Elon was asking. "You want me to solve a problem with your self-driving car tech? And if I do, you'll give me a shot? No gimmicks, no strings attached." "No strings," Elon confirmed. "But I won't lie to you. It won't be easy. This isn't a simple algorithm problem. This is something that stumps some of the brightest minds I've worked with. But I believe you're the one who can solve it. And if you do, I'll offer you a real place in the company. You'll be working alongside the best." Darren hesitated, the old pride that had driven him so many years ago stirring within him. Could he really do this? Could he still be the person who changed everything? Or had those days passed forever? He thought about the years he'd spent trying to forget who he was. He thought about the brokenness, the loneliness, and the failed ventures. But there was something about this challenge this opportunity that felt like a lifeline. "What's the problem?" Darren asked finally, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "It's a problem with our neural network," Elon explained. "We're using a modified convolutional neural network, but it struggles with unusual driving scenarios. Things like a child running into the road or an object falling off a truck. The system doesn't know how to prioritize these situations, and it's not processing the data fast enough. It's the one thing that's holding us back from a full-scale, self-driving car." Darren's eyes lit up for the first time in years. The spark that had once been so bright within him seemed to reignite. He leaned forward, suddenly interested, his mind working at a pace that matched the old days when he and Elon were side by side, solving problems no one else could. "I think I understand," Darren said, more to himself than to Elon. "You're trying to optimize the decision-making process, right? The system needs to differentiate between types of anomalies to prioritize the ones that matter. That would reduce the load on the network and improve processing speed." Elon nodded, impressed. "Exactly. But no one's been able to crack it yet." Darren ran his hand through his hair, thinking through the problem. He was already mentally sketching out ideas, mentally visualizing the code he would need to write, the changes that would have to be made to the network. It wasn't just a programming challenge. It was a puzzle, and Darren loved puzzles. For the first time in years, he felt the familiar pull of excitement. The weight of the years seemed to lift from his shoulders. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the second chance he needed. "All right," Darren said, standing up slowly. He glanced at Elon. "I'll do it. I'll give it a shot." Elon smiled, relief washing over him. "I knew you would." Over the next few days, Darren threw himself into the work with a renewed sense of purpose. It had been years since he had truly engaged in something this challenging, and for the first time in a long while, he felt alive again. He moved into an apartment that Elon had arranged for him, an unassuming but clean space in a quiet neighborhood, far from the noise and chaos of downtown. The place was simple, with a comfortable living room, a small kitchen stocked with food, and a cozy bedroom with clean sheets. It wasn't much, but it was a space of his own after so long. The apartment, though modest, felt like a fresh start. Elon had provided Darren with everything he needed: a top-of-the-line computer setup, a direct line to the Tesla team, and most importantly, a chance to prove himself. The problem with the self-driving car's neural network was complex, but Darren was determined to crack it. He spent long hours at his desk, often working through the night, his mind fully engaged as he rewrote portions of the system, testing algorithms, and refining the network's decision-making processes. The work consumed him. It was like he had never left the world of programming. The familiar thrill of solving problems, of seeing his code come to life, was something he had missed more than he cared to admit. Every day, the challenge felt more real, and the more he worked, the more the shadows of his past seemed to recede. The darkness that had been hanging over him for so many years, the feeling of being lost and forgotten, was slowly being replaced by something else, something tangible. As he worked, Elon checked in regularly, offering encouragement and updates on the progress of the Tesla team. It wasn't just the technical work that kept Darren going. It was the trust Elon had shown him. He had been given a second chance, not just to fix a problem, but to rebuild his life. It wasn't easy. Darren's pride was still a heavy burden, and there were moments when he struggled with the weight of it all. He wasn't sure if he belonged in this world anymore. Could he really return to the world of high-tech companies after everything he had been through? He had been a failure. He had lost his company, his family, and his place in the world. What did he have left to offer? But every time doubt crept in, he would look at the screen, at the lines of code he had written, and he would remember why he had started all of this in the first place. He wasn't just solving technical problems. He was rebuilding himself. This challenge, this work, it was his way of finding redemption. Not just in the eyes of Elon or the Tesla team, but in his own eyes. It was a way of showing himself that he was still capable, that the man he once was hadn't disappeared entirely. He still had it. And then, one evening, as the sky outside turned dark, it happened. Darren sat back in his chair, his eyes blurry from hours of coding, as he stared at the test results. He had made a breakthrough. The adaptive priority weighting system he had designed was working. The neural network was now able to differentiate between different types of anomalies and prioritize them accordingly. The system was faster, more efficient, and most importantly, it was responding in real time to unexpected situations, just as the self-driving car required. For the first time in years, Darren felt a rush of excitement that was purely professional, purely about the work. The kind of excitement he hadn't felt since the early days of Zip2, when he and Elon had been working side by side, solving problems and dreaming big. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with possibilities. This was it. He had done it. The next morning, Elon called to check in. "Any progress?" Elon asked, his voice as calm as ever. "I think I've got something," Darren said, his voice steady but filled with quiet excitement. "I've cracked the problem. The adaptive priority weighting system is working. It's optimizing the network's response times and improving efficiency. I've tested it, and it's holding up under real-world scenarios." Elon's voice was full of pride. "That's incredible, Darren. I knew you still had it in you." Darren allowed himself a brief smile, feeling a sense of pride that he hadn't experienced in years. "It's not perfect yet, but it's a big step forward. I'll have the team implement it into the system and test it with the data we've been collecting," Elon said. "But this is huge, Darren. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for." Darren sat in silence for a moment, his thoughts drifting. He had done it. He had solved the problem, and in doing so, he had proven to himself that he wasn't done yet. He still had something to offer, something valuable. As the days passed, Darren continued to refine his work, making adjustments and testing new iterations of the system. Each day brought new challenges, but each day also brought a little more confidence. He was no longer the man who had given up. He was a man with a purpose again, with a future that was slowly starting to take shape. But even as his professional life began to recover, there was still one piece of the puzzle that needed to be put back into place: his relationship with Emma. For all the progress he had made, for all the breakthroughs in his work, the truth was that his daughter had been absent from his life for far too long. He hadn't spoken to her in years, and the thought of reaching out filled him with a mix of fear and guilt. What would she think of him? Would she even want to hear from him? He had disappeared from her life when she was just a child, and now she was an adult, someone with her own life, her own dreams. Could he ever be a part of that again? But Elon had been insistent. He had pushed Darren to make contact, to stop hiding from the past, and to start rebuilding the relationships he had let slip away. Darren knew that Elon was right. It was time to stop running from his mistakes. It was time to face his daughter. And so, with a mixture of dread and hope, Darren sat down one evening and sent Emma a message. It was simple, direct, and raw. "Emma, it's Dad. I know it's been a long time. I've missed you, and I'd like to talk if you're willing." He had sent before he could second-guess himself. The message was out there now, and there was no turning back. A few minutes later, the response came through. "Dad, is this really you? Are you okay?" Darren's heart clenched as he read the message. It was a simple question, but it carried so much weight. She wasn't angry. She wasn't rejecting him. She was just worried. And in that moment, Darren felt a glimmer of hope, a tiny thread connecting him back to the person he had once been, the father he had been. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he typed his response. "I'm okay. Better than I've been in a long time. Can we talk tomorrow?" The reply came instantly. "Yes, Dad. I'd love that." And for the first time in years, Darren felt like he had a future. Not just in the world of technology, but in the world of human connection. He wasn't alone anymore. There was a way forward, and he was ready to take it. The days following his message to Emma felt like a blur of anticipation and nervous excitement. For years, Darren had lived in the shadows, keeping to himself, hiding from the mistakes and failures that had defined his life. But now, after everything, he was finally reaching out. He had taken the first step, one that felt terrifying but necessary. For the first time, Darren wasn't just rebuilding his career. He was rebuilding his relationship with his daughter. The day after he sent the message, Darren woke up early, his heart already racing. He had been awake for hours, unable to sleep. The usual worries about his work, about his future, had been replaced by one single thought: What would Emma say? He hadn't heard her voice in so long, and he wasn't sure what kind of relationship they could rebuild. Would she even want to talk to him? At 11 a.m., his phone buzzed. The message was from Emma. "Hi, Dad. I'm in town for the weekend. I'd love to see you if you're free. Let me know where to meet." Darren's breath caught in his chest. She was coming. This wasn't just a casual conversation anymore. It was a chance to see each other in person after so many years. He felt his nerves build up again, but this time, there was a sense of urgency. He couldn't waste this opportunity. He took a deep breath and typed out a reply. "I'll be at the cafe by the waterfront at 2 p.m. I'll be waiting." He hit send, his heart racing as he read the words again. The thought of seeing Emma face to face after so much time filled him with both excitement and dread. But there was no turning back. He couldn't hide anymore. The time seemed to stretch endlessly until 2 p.m. arrived. Darren sat at a small table in the corner of the cafe, nervously fidgeting with his coffee cup. He had dressed carefully, wearing the clean clothes Elon had given him, trying his best to look presentable despite the long years of struggle. His hair was still a bit unkempt, and his face showed signs of age and wear. He had never felt more self-conscious in his life. As the door opened, Darren's heart skipped a beat. He looked up, and there she was, Emma. She was taller than he remembered, her features sharper, more mature. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her eyes were the same, though there was a new depth in them. She had grown into a confident, intelligent woman, and Darren couldn't help but feel a wave of guilt for having missed so much of her life. She hesitated for a moment when she saw him, as though unsure how to approach the man who had been absent for so long. But then, without another word, she rushed forward and wrapped her arms around him. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking the tension that had hung in the air. "It's really you." Darren's throat tightened as he stood up and hugged her back. He could feel the weight of the years between them, but in that moment, everything else seemed to fade. He held onto her tightly, not knowing how to express the flood of emotions that overwhelmed him: love, regret, relief. After a moment, they pulled back, and Darren smiled softly at her. "I didn't know what to say. It's been so long." Emma gave him a small, understanding smile. "I know. I've missed you." They sat down together, and the conversation began awkwardly at first. Darren could feel the distance between them, the years of separation, but Emma was patient. She didn't push him. She listened as he stumbled through his explanations, tried to explain the choices he had made, the reasons he had disappeared. It wasn't easy. Every word felt like a confession, every sentence weighed down by the things he hadn't been able to say all these years. "I'm sorry, Emma," Darren said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was protecting you, but I wasn't. I was just protecting myself from facing the truth. I wasn't the father you needed, and I'm sorry for that." Emma reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You don't have to apologize. I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight, but I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you reached out." For a while, they talked about everything, about Emma's life in Boston, her work at MIT, the project she was working on, her friends, and her plans for the future. Darren listened intently, feeling both pride and sorrow. He had missed so much of her life, but he could see the woman she had become. Strong, independent, and brilliant. "I've been reading your papers, you know," Emma said, glancing at him with a smile. "The ones on neural network optimization. They helped inspire my research direction." Darren's heart swelled with a bittersweet pride. "I didn't know that. I'm glad my work could still help you, even if I wasn't there." Emma looked at him for a long moment before speaking again. "I know things haven't been easy for you, but I can see it. You're changing. You're doing something again. You're not giving up." Darren smiled softly, a hint of tears in his eyes. "I'm trying. I'm really trying, Emma." As the conversation continued, Darren found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He told Emma about the years he had spent struggling, about the mistakes he had made, and about his time living on the streets. It was painful to admit, but he knew it was important. He couldn't hide from the past anymore. "I didn't want you to see me like that," Darren confessed. "I thought it would be easier if I just stayed away." Emma squeezed his hand, her expression understanding. "I would have accepted you no matter what. "You're my dad. I just wanted to know that you were okay." The words hit Darren harder than he expected. The realization that his daughter had always wanted him in her life, no matter what, was both heartbreaking and healing. He had spent so many years thinking he had failed her, but here she was offering him forgiveness and understanding. By the end of the afternoon, Darren knew that this was just the beginning. Rebuilding his relationship with Emma wouldn't be easy, but it was a chance he hadn't dared to hope for. He wasn't alone anymore. He had a future to build, not just in the tech world, but in his personal life as well. As they said their goodbyes, Emma gave him a hug one more time. "I'll be back next month. Let's talk more then. And Dad, I'm proud of you. Keep going." Darren watched her leave, a sense of peace washing over him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. The days following his reunion with Emma were some of the most pivotal of Darren's life. Reconnecting with his daughter had ignited something deep within him, something he thought he had lost forever. It wasn't just the warmth of family he had been missing. It was the sense of purpose, the drive that had once defined him. But as much as the connection with Emma had given him hope, it had also brought him face to face with the reality of his situation. The past was still there, and he couldn't outrun it forever. Darren's work at Tesla was progressing. The breakthrough he had made with the self-driving car's neural network had been integrated into the system, and early tests were showing promising results. It felt good to be back in the world of technology, solving real-world problems. His mind had reawakened, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alive again. The algorithms he had once written in isolation were now having a tangible impact on the world, and that sense of accomplishment was something he hadn't tasted in a long time. But as he worked, Darren couldn't escape the growing unease that lingered in the back of his mind. He had taken the first steps toward redemption, but there were still scars from the past that needed healing. The hardest part was coming to terms with the choices he had made, especially the ones that had cost him everything. One day, Elon stopped by Darren's apartment, a visit that had become increasingly frequent as they worked closely on a neural network project. As usual, Elon's presence was commanding, but today, there was a different energy to the meeting. "Hey, Darren," Elon said as he sat down at the small desk across from Darren's computer. "How's the work going? Are you feeling good about the progress?" Darren nodded, pushing aside the nervous tension that had been gnawing at him all morning. "Yeah, I think we're on track. The system's running smoothly now. It's working better than I expected." "That's great to hear," Elon said, his expression shifting as he glanced at Darren. "You've been doing an incredible job, but there's something else I want to talk about." Darren's stomach tightened. He knew this conversation was coming. He just didn't know when. "What is it?" he asked, trying to mask the anxiety creeping up his spine. Elon leaned forward, his gaze serious. "I've been thinking a lot about the past few weeks, about everything you've been through. I know it hasn't been easy for you, and I think it's time we talk about." "What happened?" Darren frowned, his heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "Elon," Darren said, his voice shaking slightly. "I've made mistakes, big ones, and I've tried to hide from them. I thought if I just kept moving forward, I could forget, but I can't. Not anymore." Elon nodded slowly, his face softening with understanding. "Darren, I'm not here to judge you. I know how hard things have been, but you can't keep running from your past. You need to face it head on if you're ever going to truly heal." Darren's eyes fell to the floor. He didn't want to face the past. He didn't want to relive the years of shame, regret, and failure. He didn't want to confront the part of himself that he had buried so deep in the hope of never having to deal with it. "I lost everything, Elon," Darren said, his voice barely a whisper. "I had a family, a future, a company. I had all of it, and I ruined it. I couldn't protect Emma. I couldn't protect my company. And now, I'm not even sure I can protect myself." Elon's voice was steady but firm. "Darren, it's not about what you lost. It's about what you can still give. Your mind, your talent, it hasn't gone anywhere. You still have so much to offer." "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Darren said, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I've spent years feeling like I'm not worth anything, and now I'm supposed to just pick up the pieces like nothing happened." Elon stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the San Francisco skyline. "I know you think it's all about what you've lost, but it's not. I've been where you are, Darren. I've faced failure, rejection, and loss. There were times when I thought everything was over. But the thing about failure is that it doesn't define you. It's what you do next that matters. You don't have to face this alone. Darren stayed silent for a moment, letting Elon's words sink in. He was right, of course. He had spent so many years running from his past, hiding from the people he had let down, including Emma. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to take responsibility, not just for the mistakes he had made, but for the future he still had a chance to build. I've been afraid to face Emma, Darren said quietly, the weight of his words pressing down on him. I thought if I just stayed away, she would be better off without me. But I was wrong. You've already taken the first step, Elon said, turning back to face Darren. You've reached out to her. You're already facing the hardest part. Darren's eyes burned with emotion. But what if I've done too much damage? What if she can't forgive me? You don't know that unless you try, Elon replied. You don't know until you face her, until you make things right. You can't change the past, but you can change the future. Darren swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. I don't even know where to begin. You begin with honesty, Elon said simply. You tell her the truth. All of it. You tell her how you feel, how sorry you are, and then you listen. That's how you rebuild a relationship. Darren nodded, his heart heavy but hopeful. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that Elon was right. He couldn't keep running from the past. It was time to face it. After Elon left, Darren sat in the quiet of his apartment, staring at the wall. His mind raced with thoughts of Emma, of all the years they had lost. He could never get that time back, but he could make the most of what he had left. The phone call with Emma hadn't been easy. Reaching out to her had been one of the hardest things he had ever done, but it had been necessary. The work he had done at Tesla, the progress he had made with the self-driving car system, it all seemed insignificant in comparison to the relationship he had with his daughter. He had no idea what the future held, but he was ready to take the next step. It wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't going to happen overnight. But with every day, with every effort, Darren felt himself getting closer to the person he had once been, and the man he could still become. The days following his conversation with Elon were filled with a mixture of purpose and dread. Darren's mind constantly returned to the same thing. Emma, his daughter. The fear of facing her, of acknowledging the years of absence, weighed heavily on him. But the memory of their conversation gave him the courage to move forward. It wasn't just about the technology anymore. The breakthroughs at Tesla, the progress with the self-driving car's neural network, they were important, yes. But they felt less significant compared to what he was about to do. Rebuilding his relationship with Emma was the real challenge, the one that would determine the course of his future. For days, Darren paced around his small apartment, thinking about how he would approach the next conversation with Emma. They had made plans for her to visit again, but this time, it was different. He wasn't just meeting her to catch up. He was meeting her to truly confront the past, to acknowledge the mistakes he had made, and, hopefully, to find a way forward. He knew that rebuilding their relationship wasn't going to be easy. Emma had grown up without him, without his guidance, without his presence. The bond they once shared had been shattered by his absence. And while she had expressed that she wanted to reconnect, Darren couldn't ignore the weight of the years between them. Was it too late for him to become the father he wished he had been? Could Emma ever see him as more than the man who had abandoned her? As he sat down at his desk one evening, staring at the glowing screen of his computer, Darren's phone buzzed. It was a message from Emma. Hey, Dad, I'm here. I'll be at the cafe at 3 p.m. I'm looking forward to seeing you again. Darren's breath caught in his chest. It was happening. Emma was here. He had no more time to delay. The moment of truth had arrived. He replied quickly, his fingers shaking as he typed. I'll be there, Emma. I'm looking forward to seeing you too. At 3 p.m., Darren arrived at the cafe, his heart pounding in his chest. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, but now that it was finally here, the words seemed to slip away. What would he say? How could he explain the unexplainable? How could he make up for lost time? As he stood at the door, waiting, he saw her. Emma walked into the cafe, her eyes immediately finding his. She smiled, but there was a hint of hesitation in her step. For a moment, It was like time stood still. Darren saw his daughter, the same girl he had once held in his arms, the girl he had abandoned, and the woman she had become. She was poised, confident, but there was still something in her eyes, a trace of the child who had once looked to him for guidance. "Dad," she said, her voice warm but careful. Darren stood up, his hands trembling slightly, and reached for her. They hugged, an awkward but heartfelt embrace. When they pulled away, Darren couldn't help but notice the mix of emotions on Emma's face. There was love, yes, but also a caution. It was as though she wasn't sure if this was really him, if the man she was standing in front of was the father she had once known. They sat down together at the table, and Darren tried to calm the nervous energy inside him. This was the moment. He had to face his past, his mistakes, and the person he had been. But as he looked at Emma, he realized something. This wasn't about the past anymore. This was about the future, about what they could build now together. "I know we have a lot to talk about," Darren began, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know I can never make up for what I did, the time I lost. But I want to try. I want to be the father you deserve, Emma." Emma looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She had heard these words from him before, in different forms, during different times. But today, something felt different. Maybe it was the way he said them, or maybe it was the fact that he'd shown up, not just to apologize, but to show that he was ready to make things right. "I've thought a lot about you over the years," Emma said quietly, her eyes searching his face. "I used to be so angry, and I didn't understand. But now, I realized that part of me was always waiting for you to come back, to show me that you still cared." Darren's heart ached as he listened to her words. He had never realized just how much his absence had hurt her. All these years, he'd been focused on his own struggles, his own guilt, but he had never truly understood the pain she had carried with her. "I've missed so much of your life, Emma," Darren said, his voice breaking. "I wish I could go back and do things differently. But I can't. All I can do is move forward with you, if you'll let me." Emma's expression softened, and she reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "I don't know what the future holds, Dad, but I want to try. I want us to try." Darren felt a sense of relief wash over him, but he knew that this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be times when old wounds would resurface. But for the first time, Darren felt like he wasn't alone. He had Emma, and that was more than he could have ever hoped for. They spent the next few hours talking about their lives, about the things that had changed, and about the things that had stayed the same. It wasn't easy. There were still gaps, still moments of awkwardness, but there was a sense of connection, a sense of understanding that had been missing for so long. As they left the cafe, Darren felt a new sense of hope. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking back anymore. He was looking forward at the future he could still build with Emma by his side. The days that followed Darren's reunion with Emma were filled with a mixture of purpose, hope, and dread. For years, Darren had believed that the life he once knew had disappeared forever, that his mistakes had sealed his fate. But now, standing alongside Emma, he realized that the future was still full of possibility. Every day felt like a new opportunity, and he was no longer haunted by the ghosts of the past. His daughter's acceptance, her willingness to meet him halfway, brought him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The hardest part was still the rebuilding. It wasn't easy to repair the fractured bond between father and daughter, but it was a start, a solid foundation. There were moments of awkwardness, of course. There were silences that filled the spaces between their words. There were times when Darren could see the questions in Emma's eyes. Is he really here? Can I trust him again? But Darren saw the same glimmer of hope in her eyes that he felt within himself. They weren't just trying to reconnect. They were both learning to trust each other again. And with each small step, that trust grew. In the meantime, Darren's work at Tesla was progressing in ways that left him astonished. The adaptive priority weighting system he had designed for the self-driving car neural network had begun to yield results that far exceeded their expectations. The system was working smoother, faster, and more efficiently than anything they had ever tested before. It was a breakthrough that no one on the team had been able to solve before. But Darren had. His mind, once clouded with the weight of his past, had found clarity once again in the challenge. The work at Tesla, while rewarding, had also sparked a question that had been on Darren's mind for some time. What did his future hold? Was it just about solving problems in technology? Or could he once again return to the vision he had when he started it all, creating something that could change the world in a way that mattered beyond just business? For the first time in a long while, Darren felt like he was in control of his life again. He had faced the most painful chapter of his past, his failures, his regrets, and had found the courage to step forward into the unknown. The door to his future was open, and Darren knew he had to walk through it. But as he worked day in and day out, the questions still lingered in his mind. Could he return to the vision he once had for Neuralink? Could he make up for all the years that had passed, for the moments when he had let his pride stand in the way of his dreams? One afternoon, after a long day of working on the neural network optimization, Darren received a message from Elon. The simplicity of it made his stomach tighten. "Hey Darren, when you get a chance, I'd like to talk. Meet me in my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't worry, it's not urgent. Just something I've been thinking about." Darren stared at the message for a long time. He hadn't spoken to Elon about the future of Neuralink for weeks. The idea of returning to that venture, of diving into a project that had once meant everything to him, filled him with both excitement and trepidation. He had spent so long doubting himself, pushing aside his own ambition out of fear of failure. But now, with everything that had happened, Darren knew that he couldn't keep hiding from his past forever. This was the chance he'd been waiting for. It was time to decide what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. The next morning, Darren walked into Elon's office, his heart racing. Elon was sitting at his desk, his face lit with a quiet intensity. He didn't waste any time. "Darren," Elon said, standing up to greet him, "thanks for coming in. I've been thinking a lot about the work we're doing with Tesla, about what you've been able to accomplish, and I wanted to ask you something." Darren nodded, trying to mask his nervousness. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Elon paused, his gaze steady. "I'm going to get straight to the point. You've done some amazing work with the self-driving car system. It's clear you've still got it. But I've been thinking about what's next. I want to offer you something more, something bigger." Darren raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I want you to help lead a new project at Neuralink," Elon said, his tone unwavering. "We're making great strides, but there's so much more to do. Neuralink isn't just about advancing technology for the sake of innovation. It's about improving lives. We're on the brink of changing the world again, and I need someone with your vision to help take it to the next level." Darren felt a jolt of surprise. Neuralink, the project that had once been his dream. The dream he had worked on tirelessly before everything fell apart. The dream that had slipped through his fingers when everything came crashing down. Elon was asking him to return to that dream, to help co-lead the next chapter of something that could truly change the world. "You want me to co-lead the project with you?" Darren asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and excitement. Elon nodded. "Yes, you've always had the vision, Darren. You're one of the few people I know who can think about the future of neural interfaces in a way that no one else can. You're the person I trust to help guide this next phase of Neuralink." Darren stood there for a moment, the weight of the offer settling in. The idea of returning to Neuralink, the idea of once again working on the cutting-edge technology that had once been his passion, was a dream come true. But it wasn't just about the technology anymore. It was about redemption. It was about using the lessons he had learned, the mistakes he had made, to build something that could make a lasting impact. "I'll do it," Darren said, his voice filled with a newfound confidence. "I'll help lead the project. I'm in." Elon smiled, the light in his eyes reflecting the pride he felt. "Welcome back, Darren. We got a lot of work to do." As Darren left Elon's office, he felt a sense of exhilaration that he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't just returning to a past venture. He was stepping into the future. This was his second chance, not just to rebuild his career, but to help shape the future of neural interfaces in a way that could change lives forever. Later that day, as Darren walked back to his apartment, he pulled out his phone and saw a new message from Emma. It was short but powerful. "Hey Dad, I'm really proud of you. I can't wait to see what you do next." Darren smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. Emma had always been the driving force behind his desire to change. Reconnecting with her had given him the strength he needed to face the world again, to take the risks that would ultimately lead to his redemption. He stood at the edge of the city, looking out at the sprawling skyline of San Francisco. The city had once felt like a place of failure and loss, but now it felt like the place where everything could begin again. He had lost a lot, but he had also gained something priceless, a second chance to change the world, to rebuild what was broken, and to be the father his daughter had always hoped for. And with that, Darren knew one thing for sure: the future was his to shape.